Hi to everybody coming through in this webinar. We're just going to wait a minute or two to welcome some more people as they join this meeting room before we get started. So I'll give it about another minute or two, and then we'll kick things off. Hello to the people that continue to trickle through. We're just going to wait another minute and see if more people are going to be joining us before we really kick things off. So I'll be starting in about 1 minute. Okay, hello everybody, and welcome to this SESH sponsored webinar. My name is Dr. Patrick Rowley, and I'm the Director of Clinical Operations in SESH and the facilitator of this webinar. I'll be posing questions throughout the webinar to our panel members to generate ongoing discussion. The title of today's webinar, DE&I Workplace Solutions, Creating an LGBTQIA+ Affirming Environment. Its description: a conversation on how to support your LGBTQIA+ staff amid recent homophobic and anti-trans legislation, and how to build support for this community into your diversity, equity, and inclusion DE&I programs, not just in June, but 365 days a year. Our panel members for today's webinar are Kia Davis and Jordan Hall. Kia Davis, she, her, is a licensed clinical social worker and a clinical supervisor with 10 years of experience in healthcare and community organizations. She incorporates mindfulness and cognitive therapy techniques in her work with adults recovering from complex PTSD, major life changes, and chronic stress. With a focus on serving diverse populations, including Black individuals, LGBTQIA+ individuals, and survivors of violent crime, Kia is a certified clinical trauma professional and trained in the trauma-conscious yoga method. She holds a master's of social work and a nonprofit leadership and management graduate certificate. Kia has held supervisory roles at several organizations, most recently as the Population Health Services Manager and Patient Services Manager in Washington, D.C. Welcome, Kia. Our second panel member, Jordan Hall, is a film, TV, and theater actress. She is the recipient of both lead performance and ensemble awards from the Los Angeles Drama Critics Circle for her performance in the title role of Poor Claire at the Echo Theater Company. She made her television debut starring in Showtime's The L Word, Generation Q, opposite Jennifer Beals, Kate Moaning, and Leisha Haley. She has also been seen in the Netflix movie Hustle alongside Queen Latifah, Robert Duvall, Ben Foster, and Adam Sandler. Welcome, Jordan. As far as this presentation is concerned, this is a 1-hour webinar session. A recording and summary of the webinar will be shared after its conclusion. The webinar is intended to be an authentic conversation on this important topic to promote conversation among our panel members and encourage questions from participants at the conclusion of the webinar. We will save 50 minutes at the conclusion of the webinar to respond to questions and thoughts posed by the audience. Questions and thoughts can be shared through one of two ways: through the chat function that you should see at the bottom of your screen. But if you choose to submit anonymous questions, you can use the Q+A button you see on the bottom of your screen. Two of the main focus areas of the webinar are creating conversation about the complexity of the issue that we're discussing here today and how it may feel awkward to broach this topic with colleagues and or employees, as well as engaging colleagues and employees on this topic in a more affirming manner than one that highlights inclusivity. Inclusivity should function as an expectation for all demographics. With that, I will pass it to Jordan Hall to share a little bit more about her story. Jordan?
Hi, thanks so much for that intro, Patrick. Hi, my name is Jordan. I grew up in Iowa, which is not one of the most inclusive places on earth as being a Black queer person. I am an actor, and that is sort of my main thing. I came out through being on the L Word, which, like, talk about affirming workplace environments, like that was the best of the best. And so I have a huge passion for not only representation as an actor, but also on and off the screen. What does it look like to be a queer person in a place that doesn't necessarily have a system for you? And so I'm really excited for this conversation and to learn a bunch.
Awesome. Thank you, Jordan. So with that, I just want to open it up to some conversation through the questions that we've created for Jordan and Kia here today. So the first question I want to throw at both of you: would you mind sharing a personal experience in which you witnessed an organization take meaningful steps towards supporting LGBTQIA plus staff? And how do you feel this step impacted the staff people that identified as such?
Sure. Do you have a preference for who goes first, or?
No.
You can go.
Okay. I would be happy to. Hello, everybody. Yeah, so one example I can think about is when I worked for a community health organization where patients and staff alike were sharing frustrations about how sexual and gender identity was being discussed, and also how folks talked about relationships in families, right? There can be, I think, assumptions that folks are monogamous, or that maybe there's like a mom and a dad, or that people have like a spouse. And we were running into families that looked all kinds of ways, and we really wanted to make sure that we were getting the right information and, respecting people. So a few queer staff, right, we approached our leadership about it, who then said, you know what, yeah, we could do better here. And then we teamed up with our HR department to create like presentations for folks about LGBTQ inclusivity in general. And then specifically about how do we talk about sex and gender identity with patients, and then how can we like change our documentations? Maybe there's like signage, just like things that we can do around the workplace to like acknowledge and respect people. And because we started with like patients, we then had to address like, how do we actually like treat staff? What are we like as a culture when it comes to inclusivity and being an affirming place? So that I think was really helpful to have these larger conversations. And then as a result, we started using more inclusive language. They had like queer working groups for staff to help influence and create policies for the workplace, and then also for customers or patients.
That's awesome. I know for me, when I worked on the L Word, Generation Q, they're already, because the show is primarily for the queer community, it already had so much in place in terms of, people in higher up positions already being queer. So that was great. I think one of the biggest initiatives though was when we had a lot of non-binary actors on set. And I think for a lot of people, even it doesn't matter, like, it doesn't matter what you identify as. If a terminology is new to you, you're gonna fuck up. You're going to mess up, sorry. And so there was a lot of initiative around respecting people's pronouns and also being graceful for when you mess up. And it was done in a really dignified way where it didn't put pressure on the non-binary people to be spearheading their own advocacy. It was really like, we're all in this together. We're all trying to be the most respectful in the workplace as we can. So they did a lot of like meetings before and pronouns on call sheets. And sometimes even before I'd go on set, we would practice. I had like some older hairdresser didn't really understand the terminology. So she would ask me like, before this non-binary actor comes in, may I just practice with you? And so we would just practice, they are coming into into the hairs. And like, although it sounds quite like rudimentary, it actually like helped a lot because it showed that this person cared and that they were willing to make themselves look, they put their ego out of their way. So I think that was a very positive workplace interaction.
Thank you for sharing both of those examples. I'm just going to pull some things away that I saw in both of your stories. And it sounds like the culture of the work organization is an important piece to this process. And you heard in Jordan's story, it was almost like the culture was ready to become more affirming due to the people that were employed by it. Whereas Kia's organization might have taken a little bit more effort because that it lacked a little bit of that awareness or that identity in the work organization. But I love what Jordan said is grace, and the piece that I took away from Kia was respect. So really combining those two ideas, respect and grace, I think is a great approach to taking steps to make sure that we create that more affirming environment. And it doesn't just take one person or one small group of people. It takes a community to really make this happen. So really love those responses. Second question that I have for both of you, and feel free to pinball back and forth with one another. What are some common challenges or barriers that companies face when trying to create an LGBTQIA plus affirming workplace?
I don't know if you agree, Kia, but I think the biggest one is that it just goes down to leadership. It's like, who is in power and do they look like us? I think usually that's just where it bumps up against. Just because then I don't know if you agree, but Kia.
Yeah, totally. I think it starts with leadership. It speaks to maybe the systemic nature, right, of all of this, is that there tends to not be a lot of folks with all kinds of identities, specifically marginalized identities, in this case, LGBTQIA plus identities, who are in leadership who can get these conversations and these practices started. So that can be really hard. You might feel like it can become the job maybe of employees to like convince people like, this is important, this matters, like, please like see us. That can be a pretty big undertaking, I think. So definitely with leadership. Mm-hmm.
And I also think with leadership, sometimes I've experienced, it's not only their misunderstanding, but it's also like their guilt. So I find a big roadblock is taking care of someone's guilt. And I think that breeds a lot of performative activism because they're just trying to save their reputation instead of an honest approach. So I think eliminating the shame and the blame and misunderstanding with leadership, I think across the board makes it a lot easier and a lot of a smoother transition.
Yeah, I want to say like snaps to that, right? I think, Patrick, you spoke to how conversations in general around this can be really awkward, to say the least. And so that guilt, shame, confusion even, right, will show up pretty quickly. And it can get weird sometimes. Like, maybe your boss or manager approaches you and they're like, we want to start a committee and we would like to ask you, person of color or queer person or whatever, if you would lead the charge. And while that could be a very flattering and welcome invitation, sometimes it doesn't feel like that. And I think, but folks are also going to have to be willing to kind of be with some of that discomfort too, because we're all just like being people out here. But I think folks got to really look at their intentions and some of like that stuff, for lack of a better word, that Jordan was talking about.
I think it's a great conversation that we're having right here about like the response that leadership may take. And I think it's to some degree a lack of awareness of how those kind of things are communicated and how they are rolled out to you. Yes, to Kia, as you said, it's extremely flattering to be identified as that person that could lead the charge, but for what purpose, right? Because you identify as such, or because they view you as a leader amongst other people within your organization. So I think it's one way to approach that conversation. Hey, Kia, because you identify as LGBTQIA or marginalized population, we think you should be the head of this committee, but rather say something to the degree of, Kia, we view you as a person that can advocate on behalf of a population that is marginalized, that speaks well, that is a leader within this organization. Do you feel like that's accurate to say that, or is there anything you would add to that?
Yeah, I think that's totally like a great place to start, is just to say, like, we recognize this about you. We really want to highlight, uplift, amplify this, these either like talents or interests, needs of yours or other staff. And also, if the, employee who fits, I suppose, whatever group, right, we're talking about, if they're not the ones who can or even want to like lead that, I think still hearing their experiences, right, within the organization, maybe just in broader society is helpful too, just kind of like, how is it working here as a blah, 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 right? So like they might not have the solution, but I think just hearing their stories and experiences is also really valuable. It helps people feel less isolated, less invisible at work, to just like speak to them. So that could be a place to start, just saying like, we sense that maybe there's something we could do better here, or, we're just interested in you and your experience. If we can make the experience of you and other folks like better, I think you could start there too. And there doesn't have to be this expectation of, marginalized person is going to like fix this. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I'm going to move to our third question. What do you feel is the best way to start creating an affirming environment for LGBTQIA plus staff? So we've talked a little bit about like conversations with leadership, but really getting that ball rolling. What does that look like to you, or what do you think that it may look like?
I think for me, it always just goes down to, I feel the most affirmed when people know, they already just know. It's such a bold ask, but someone that like is already interested in the community. Someone that's like, oh, I already know this terminology because I watch RuPaul's Drag Race, or, I already like, they are like plugged in to like, not only, our community and the cashes and prizes of it, but also like the legislation of it. I just really, it really helps when people are, it makes me feel really affirmed when someone that someone that's cis and straight, but already cares politically and socially about my community, and is like interested in it. I don't know. I just always feel, and especially in a workplace, they're like, oh yeah, I already knew that. But, it's okay if they don't know it. But I always makes me feel good. I'm like, yeah, you get it.
I love that idea that every identity comes with caches and prizes. That's a beautiful way to state that. I'm probably gonna use that before the end of the day, but I love that, and I think it creates like that statement alone makes me want to develop a greater interest in populations that I'm less familiar with, and that goes outside of LGBTQIA plus. So thank you for that. But Kia, any thoughts on how you would get the ball rolling in creating a more affirming environment?
Yeah, I would agree to what Jordan just shared. Like, I think, of course, everyone's not going to know the things about the folks and the things all the time, but that is nice. It does feel good to be like, okay, I don't have to do a lot of work or educating here. Like, that feels great. But if someone does not have that knowledge or understanding, I think just to being open, one of the barriers is folks are just resistant to like change. And it doesn't even have to be because they are like maybe secretly like a bigot or like racist or homophobic. It could just be folks don't like new things, right? There's a lot of I think security and safety for people, just knowing what to expect and what's going to happen. I think our basic need includes that. And so just understanding that folks might say no or have like a lot of questions before anything happens. So like being really patient, and then committed, like this might be hard, y'all, but we're going to try anyway. Like we just have really good intentions and we want to do this. So I think seeing a commitment, and maybe something in that's more tangible is for the company to say, right, we are invested in, we want to establish policies and practices that explicitly protects LGBTQIA plus employees. Like it needs to be said, I think, so that people don't have to do the guesswork, and just get right to it. So it's like, we want to protect employees from discrimination and harassment, and we want to have equal opportunities for like everybody. Yeah, people should just say it, and then we can get to like to doing it and then putting some of that in place.
I like what you said right there, Kia, specifically for individuals that identify as LGBTQIA plus, that, you know, if you're a part of that process and helping to get the ball rolling, as the metaphor that I'm using here, you may experience resistance, and it's almost to anticipate that resistance so that you can demonstrate your own resilience, or your group's resistance, or your group's resilience through that resistance. Mm-hmm. So it can be difficult in the beginning, but there's more opportunities that will come as long as you continue to persevere through it. And I think that's valid and very helpful to hear.
Could I add something? Because I really love what Kia was saying. I think this idea of like not knowing is such a queer experience. I think like as queer folks, we do not have modes or instruction manuals. Like our parents don't give us the birds and the bees talk. So we develop an attitude of learning on the fly, and a culture of like failing a lot and then figuring something else, you know? And I think it's already embedded in what it means to be queer. I feel that you just don't know. There isn't necessarily a system in place or like a person that you can look up to. Like you sort of figure, so you're not alone if you're not plugged in to the queer community and you don't know. Like I feel that always. So like we're learning on the fly together, and there has to be an unwillingness, a willingness to fail at it, because you're in good company, I think. Yeah.
That's awesome. I love that. I want to talk a little bit more about strategies, tips, tools, recommendations that both of you have. What are some other strategies or initiatives that companies have or could implement to support LGBTQIA plus staff? And this is from your experience, from stories that you've read, from interactions with colleagues that you know of. Anything that comes to mind for you here?
I think something that I have just been seeing either from colleagues or friends, who talk about their workplaces, people are creating like affinity groups or employee resource groups a lot these days. So essentially they're groups for people to find connection and support. So maybe if it's like, all right, organization wide, we got a lot to work on, but at least like, you could start with creating a place or a space for LGBTQIA folks. You could have all kinds of identity-based groups, actually, that's been happening a lot. And just having like, whether it's like a Zoom coffee hour to like a full-on like luncheon, or maybe support group, or just meeting for folks to, I think, collaborate or just be like, just exist and not have to worry about some of that other stuff that we were talking about. Yeah, you could start there, and then maybe out of those groups, that's where you get the information and the experiences. You could use that to then developing, practices and like long-term solutions for some DE&I strategies. I think another very basic strategy is like just ensure that all employees, right, because this matters for everybody, that they have like good benefits and healthcare coverage. So like a way to ensure inclusivity there is like, hey, this covers gender affirming care. This covers parental leave for all kinds of families. I think we talk a lot about like like maternal leave and like support for moms, but like there are all kinds of parents and families. Maybe there are folks who need time for like adoption, foster care, like things to really consider that I think would impact explicitly LGBTQIA plus people, but everyone, right? I think we all want more comprehensive healthcare. So that is a place to start. Maybe upping mental health benefits and offerings for folks. So, you know, could you make sure that your EAP program cover services for LGBTQIA plus identified people? Do you have a support group or a counselor like on staff? I mean, depending on the needs and the resources available, like it could look like anything. And then just, again, just promote general allyship and respect, right? It's nothing to say happy Pride Month, right? In the company newsletter, right? Like, I know it could feel like we don't want to get political, but it's really just like acknowledging it's a pretty big month for a pretty big segment of the population. So like, yeah, you can acknowledge just like general holidays and observances, I think.
Yeah, I echo everything you said. I love that. Yeah.
I think what Kia communicates is like, once again, the complexity that exists, you know, how people identify and how that transfers to identifying as a parent, and are you a parent of an adopted child, a child that may differ from the race or color of your skin, and how the complexities that exist there. There's so many layers to this idea, and I think it's great that you're bringing them up, because I think just having this conversation creates some thought for people in levels of power in companies to, you know, take a deep dive back into what they're doing in their policies and procedures, and hopefully take action to make change and support everybody as a whole. But acknowledgement is where it starts, right? So thank you for that. Moving on, want to throw the question at you. How can LGBTQIA plus employees best practice self-advocacy at work? So kind of taking the focus off the decision makers and placing it back on those that identify as LGBTQIA plus. How can they best advocate for themselves within their workspaces?
I think self-advocacy, for me, sometimes looks, and this is interesting because I've never really been in an extremely corporate environment, so I don't know fully. So I'm very excited to learn more about what that's like. I just know from my experience of advocacy on places that I'm very privileged, where I don't need to use much of it, comes from gender expression. And I find like some of my friends that do work in sort of a more corporate setting find that to be true as well. I find from just pulling from their experiences that they advocate for themselves as dressing against the norm in a business way. And that feels like an extension of their identity that they get to show and that they get to be proud of in an appropriate way. But advocacy is sort of to be honest, it's sort of tough for me sometimes. I don't know. Yeah, it's tough for me. I don't know if you have that experience, but yeah.
No, I get that. I think it can be tough, particularly like at work, because already there's just a dynamic there that could make it feel really hard, maybe even impossible to really advocate for yourself or like promote or prioritize your own well-being, essentially. I totally get how it's like, do I do that? Can we do that here? But I think gender expression is a great place to start, and it could be something very quiet, like if it's like a button. I have, when I work with clients around identity and workplace advocacy, it might be like writing their pronouns like on their name tag. It could be something like that, but if you want it to be a bolder like declaration of something, I'm like, yeah, rock out, go for it. And then, other things that folks can do, I just think advocate for your own boundaries, right? And expectations. So like, you don't have to talk about your personal life. You don't have to talk about your romantic life. You certainly don't have to talk about like your health or your anatomy with people, right? And so really, people don't have to have access to you. I think it's unfortunately really common for queer folks, marginalized folks in general to get a lot of questions all the time about things. That's a delicate balance because some people want to know and they want to understand, and we're trying to build empathy, but also like, we don't want people to be like nosy and then we have to like overshare. So really working on that. If you need accommodations, right, like voice that, if you have those like certain needs, right, to make, I think, the workplace just better for you and therefore better for other people, like talk to your leadership about it. I like what you said, Jordan, about like, we don't always have like the role models or like the guidance, like nobody's like, this is how you be queer, or this is how you be trans, or this is how you be, insert here, right? But if you can, if there are people either at work or outside of work, who you feel like are really navigating, like they're just really rocking it at work, like see if they'd be interested in mentoring you, or just maybe take whatever advice or tips you can from them. I really love something about, queer communities is that we're all about chosen family and building community for ourselves. I think we're very good at finding support and examples in that way. Build connections with LGBTQIA plus folks at work if you can. If there's not a lot, or if there's not a lot that you rock with, see if there's like an ally, is there a cis and or straight person at work that maybe, you can just like align with or ally with. And this is probably most importantly, but like understand your rights protections at work, right? Get the manual, see what it says, like how does your workplace explicitly protect, right? The rights of everyone, and then I guess explicitly, right, LGBTQ plus folks. Like just really know like what's what, and then if what you need or what should be there isn't there, then you know what to advocate for. Yeah, I hope that helps or that answers that question. Yeah.
I mean, I took a lot away from that.
Okay.
I mean, first point is that it's pretty cool to say that the two people that I'm engaging in conversation with right now are the role models, are the people that younger LGBTQIA plus generations are going to be looking up to in many ways. So thank you for, serving on this webinar and having an open discussion about that. The second thing that I took away was certainly like LGBTQIA plus people have a responsibility to impart knowledge and share information about their experiences and how to become more affirming within the workplace environment. But that responsibility also falls on those that don't identify with that population. And I think that connects back to Jordan's previous comment, is when she hears that people have interest in her identity and the things that she enjoys to do, it almost fosters greater connection between one another. So I think that that's a shared responsibility. Just want to touch base with Jordan real quick, because I think that you're probably not the only person that struggles with the idea of self-advocacy. If you're comfortable responding to the idea, why do you struggle with self-advocacy? Is it something that's just a part of your personality, or is it something that exists outside of you?
I think it comes from scarcity complex of being a minority. I think when you're given opportunities, especially not only in a corporate setting, but like I find, and at work, when you're given a special opportunity, I never want to ruin it by setting a boundary, which inevitably helps. But I just get this fear of like, if I speak up, there will be consequences. And thankfully, you can, that is becoming less and less common. But I think, yeah, and also the people pleasing part, for sure. I'm an actor, so we're all kind of people pleasers. But I find like but it's something I'm really working on. And I think it is very powerful, like Kia said, to say, here's what is okay and here's what's not okay. And it being received and respected. I don't think it feels so good to be able to have that heard. But yeah, it's a journey for sure.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we're starting to come to a close on the questions that we have, and I see your questions from the audience pouring in, and I want to make sure that we do get to them in about 10 minutes. But one question that I have for you is, what resources are you aware of that can help guide companies in creating an LGBTQIA plus affirming workplace?
Good question. So there are a ton out there. Like there's a lot, right? Just on the internet, at your libraries, wherever people go for just information or resources in general. But a few that I really like that I think are great places to start, right? Could be the Human Rights Campaign. They have like general workplace equality resources. There's like I think like a tab on the website that you can look up just like issues or topics. And then specifically they have like a list of resources for employers. So for employers who want to make a more inclusive or affirming workplace, that's a good place to start. They also have a Gen Ec, like EQ, like generation equality. It's a guide to entering the workforce. I think it's great advice really for anyone, but for LGBTQIA plus folks who just want advice and resources on just like how to navigate all kinds of issues at work, how to find jobs that are more affirming, how to ask for certain needs or accommodations at work. And I also like Out and Equal Workplace Advocates. They have a toolkit for organizations to like help assess their inclusion. So if you're like, we don't even know what it looks like here, I think that's a great place to start. And then you could start making plans to then making the improvements that you want to make. We talked a lot about, I think, self-advocacy and the importance of sharing your experience. And so Out and Equal also has a document called Sharing Your Story at Work. And it's basically just like, how do you talk about you, right, at work? I think that's a great place for folks who maybe have issues or concerns around maybe oversharing or people pleasing or like not showing up in the way that they really want to. So it's like, how can you really craft your story, right? Be present at work in a way that you want to, that benefits everyone. And then for people in general, like a great personal resource for empowerment, self-advocacy, at work, wherever, I really do recommend the Queer and Transgender Resilience Workbook. It's by Annalise Singh. It's just, I think, a really fabulous book that I picked up at a conference a few years ago. And there is some talk there about how you want to show up at work. There's a lot of talk about relationships, boundaries that I think can be helpful for folks. So yeah, those would be my recommendations.
Yeah, I would recommend GLAD is a really good one that I use a lot. I think there's a poet named Alok, A-L-O-K, that specifically in terms of self-advocacy again, is a really amazing activist in that realm that I constantly look towards. But yeah, those are some of mine.
Excellent. This is great resources. Yeah. And for those that are taking diligent notes, we'll be sharing this information out to you as well. So if you miss something, don't worry too much. We'll have that information coming your way. Before we pass it off to the Q&A part of this webinar, I just want to pose one final question for you, and I kind of want to paint a picture for you. Jordan and Kia, you're sitting in front of the decision makers at a company, and they're really, looking to you for guidance, suggestion, recommendation. What would be just some minor point or a very important point that you would share with decision makers at companies as they start to focus on the learnings that could come from this training and, creating that more affirming environment within the workplace?
I would think, and what is shown is that we can't want it more than you. We can get you to where you want to go in terms of how much you want to know, but if you're a decision maker, you have to really, really want it. Because it's and you have to realize how important it is. And just because you say it doesn't mean you live it. And I think the more and more that as a decision maker and a person in power, you keep your own house in order and like make sure you don't. I find like for a lot of like leaders, like usually if they're not really accepting of themselves, it's really hard for them to be accepting of their employees. So I just peace and love, man. I don't think that's like more of like corporate language, but I just think like just be really, really gentle and really, really accepting, and just learn and learn and learn and be more curious and understand, like be really curious. That's what I would say.
Thank you.
I almost want to be really corny and be like, mic drop there. That was really great, Jordan. I loved that. Yeah, to like be curious. Like, I know that this is a very brief, very broad in general, like webinar. And so just like starting this journey of like creating an affirming workplace or even more affirming workplace, it is a lot to take in. It seems like a heavy lift because it will be. It is, not the whole time, but definitely at the start. I would also just encourage people to take a moment to just reflect on like, how does this make you feel? And just be with it. Are you excited? Are you overwhelmed? Are you like, another initiative, another thing we have to do? That's like all like valid. That's going to happen. You're going to feel a range of emotions. And do it anyway. So like understand that, work through that, and like do it anyway, like really commit to this. You're not going to craft your company's like guide or policies overnight. I'm not expecting that. I hope no one else is. Also, there are things that you can do like operationally, but everything cannot be manualized. There's going to have to be some, I guess, sincerity or just like intentionality, maybe, like that will need to be involved in this. This requires a lot of thoughtfulness. And with that, right, like, and commitment. So please expect an ongoing evaluation and like make room for that. I think it's really worth it to do all of that. I think workplaces and our broader society benefits from these efforts. I guess I would really just say to decision makers, what people want most is just like commitment to making more equitable spaces happen. We understand that like we'll eventually get there and that it's not going to be like easy or fun all the time, but we still want to know that like people are committed to that. I hope that answers the question.
Definitely. Commitment, I hear from Kia. Want to, I hear from Jordan. I love that statement that you made, Jordan. You have to want it more than us. I just think that provides validation to a marginalized population, and it shows them that they're kind of in the well with you, not looking at the top of the well saying, how are you doing down there? They're experiencing it with you. So with that, I'm going to turn our attention to some questions that have been posed. So we're going to continue to shine the spotlight on Kia and Jordan. and see what they're thinking about these questions. Sorry if we can't get to all the questions, but we appreciate you sending them in. The first one that I'm seeing here, what are some tips to respond to employees who lack the grace and willingness to be educated about these issues? What are some tips to respond to employees who lack the grace and willingness to be educated about these issues?
That is a wonderful question. Do you have any instinctive thoughts here?
I'm looking at the question to like maybe break it apart a bit. So respond the lack of grace and willingness to be educated about these issues. I mean, I don't know that there's much that we could give as far as response other than I hear you or okay. I mean, I don't want to put people in this role of like questioning or counseling, right? Folks who might have that point of view, you know, questions that I would have, right? Or like, let's look at that. Let's talk about, you know, why there's like, you know, no curiosity. Yeah, I have to say I'm a little stumped because I'm like, how could somebody not? But like, I know that we run into that, you know, like I know that we run into that. Like the grace and willingness to be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know from my experience, I have encountered when someone in a formal setting said something, you know, that was corrected and then didn't take it well. And there comes to a certain point where that can be harassment. Like if you're, it comes to a certain point where it's like, yeah, that if I do my due diligence and keep my side of the street clean and say like, this didn't sit with me well. That was not the right way to communicate it. Here's the right way. And they don't change. I think it's well, then it's no longer your responsibility. It's someone, that's where there has to be systems in place where if that happens, you can go to that person and say, you know, something didn't, like there should be, I think there should be not necessarily consequences or punishment, but there should be treatment around that. So I think that falls onto the systems again in the workplace.
Yeah, and is there, maybe that means we just have to then frame it if we've not already through a legal kind of ethical lens, right? Like we have these responsibilities as an organization to XYZ. If your organization does not have that stated somewhere already, maybe do that. That might be your cue to do that, right? Yeah. Everyone does not have to be, I mean, they'll get the education, they will get the information because like you're gonna provide it. If they do not want to take it in or implement it, then I think, right, that would fall under, you know, some of the things Jordan talked about, perhaps harassment. Workplaces have all kinds of policies for folks who don't, I hate to use words like abide, I really do, right? But who cannot follow, adhere to, right? You know, certain policies and practices. So that might be a way to address it. I really, you know, would hope that it doesn't, right? Get to that.
Yeah, so certainly some opportunities to address it individually with that person if you feel comfortable doing that. But the systemic level might be the more meaningful approach, hopefully those processes exist already. Thank you for that response. Another submitted question was, how do you decide when to disclose your sex or gender identity when it can be invisible and sometimes invisibility feels safe? Really good questions here. How do you decide when to disclose your sex or gender identity when it can be invisible and sometimes invisibility feels safe?
And wow, yeah, I almost was like, invisibility doesn't feel safe, feels comfortable, but it does feel safe. There only 17 states have legislation against non-discrimination for the queer community. So that is a very valid thing to say. And I think it's I cannot have a one size fits all response, because I think the harsh reality is that it is unsafe in a workplace sometimes to be fully yourself. And especially being from the Midwest, I really know that. And I think it really just, it's all about, it's the boundaries. Like, I think a quote about boundaries is the closest distance in which I can love you and myself equally. If hiding yourself is infringing on how much you're loving yourself, then there needs to be an adjustment of a boundary. But it really is specific to the environment. So I don't know. That's a really good question.
Yeah, I like that, how you broke down like a way to look at boundaries. And thinking about that, I get it, how maybe invisibility or non-disclosure can actually feel and be safer for folks. I mean, if that is the case, then I'm like, if there isn't a need or a requirement to disclose and it just feels safer, then then don't. But if you really are wanting to or trying to figure out how to like manage that, have friends, colleagues, clients who maybe are going through a change in their gender identity, like it might be something that they are transitioning into or becoming, and that could be a process for people. Folks might do that in stages, and one stage or a couple of stages can include, how do I then be more present, visible at work? Like, what does it mean? And that could be, it could start with talking with a couple of colleagues to going directly to leadership and or HR about it. Yeah, and deciding, it really depends on, what is, I think, meaningful for you. I mean, I really support, like, everybody doesn't have to know your everything, right? You could, if you want to go to work and be a worker among other workers, like, please do that. That is enough. But if you find yourself like curious about what would it look like if I said X about myself, maybe practice. Jordan talked about practicing. Maybe practice with people either at work or outside of work who are safe, to see like what that could feel like, and then maybe plan for responses that you might get.
Thank you for that. Great questions. This is one that I certainly connect with, because I see throughout the month, I saw, people trying to advocate for Pride Month, but, is slapping a happy Pride Month to the monthly newsletter, or putting a flag, behind the Google icon enough? Is there other things that companies miss by just doing that?
Yeah, I think it's as much energy as you're putting into how it's looking, how much energy are you putting into how it's being lived? So I think, yeah, just integrity in the workplace. To me, it's really funny when Geico has it, just like things that I never expected has a say politically in it. Like, it's funny to me, and great. But it's like, okay, well, what are the people that are being really affected by that company? What is it like on the inside of it? So yeah, just a question of integrity. Yeah, I don't know. That makes sense. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, and a rainbow or a mention in a newsletter, like those are very basic first steps. I don't think that it ends there or that it should end there. For some organizations, though, that might be where they start, because there's not a lot going on as far as like being an inclusive or affirming workplace. But I like, again, when companies just explicitly say, right, like, we do not support, right, the discrimination or have harassment of, these groups. I would rather they say that. They could never put a rainbow in the window or, have this like big pride campaign. But if they just say like, we, right, respect, promote the rights of others, I love that. So, yeah.
Yeah. An example, which I don't think is like, I live in LA, so it's very privileged, the amount of, you know, freedom you kind of have. But I remember my friend was like, yeah, it's drag day at work. And I was like, what? She was like, it's drag day at work. And she worked at the startup, and they had a day this month where everyone went in drag. And I thought that was so funny. And I was like, wow, what a day for for a pride, which it can't be done for everyone, of course. But like, it was just it was like not so serious, like brought the joy in it, you know, like it's a joyful month, like it's a joy, like it's a fun time for me. So yeah.
Cool. Good. I think this question that I saw come through relates to the idea, and you know, that the question I just posed was company advocacy, but there's also, you know, the way that you self-advocate. And we had a question about that before, but what about the idea of burnout associated with being an advocate? How do you how would you characterize that? How have you experienced that in the past?
Yeah, I super relate to burnout. I feel the most burned out when my anger is sustaining me, and I mistake it for anger just being a catalyst. Especially like, I feel really burnt out with all of the new legislation on like drag ban and trans healthcare. And there's just so much that I just sort of got it to a certain point. I just like closed my eyes. And I think what has gotten me out of that is softening the feeling of like, this pisses me off, to like, this like hurts, like this like really hurts. So like, I don't know, for me, I mean, therapy therapy is like really, really, really helped the burnout, and figuring out, okay, what can I control and what can't I control. And it's tough, especially if you're, I don't know, I'm still in it. Like, I don't know, for me, it's just like the therapy aspect, like really investigating all the feelings and the trauma that comes up with being in a queer community, especially in a I don't know, I could be rambling, but it's yeah.
No, I hear you, Jordan. Honestly, as a counselor, I'm hearing like ideas of grief almost. There's like a lot of emotions that you're transitioning between. And when you were talking, I was like, what could she be grieving the loss of? And it could be just like a sense of like belongingness, a sense of connection, and thing, but to a larger public, you know, as opposed to, you know, the maybe the groups that you're closer with or you have more intimate relationships with. It's interesting. So thank you for that. You mentioned legislation. I want to continue that conversation as we continue to wrap up here. But what do you suggest for companies in states that have or are about to pass anti-LGBTQIA plus legislation? This person was especially concerned about gender affirming healthcare for employees and whether that can be legally available.
Yeah, that is a great question. And so some workplaces will, you know, they might address it and say like, you know, here's how this bill or this legislation could, you know, impact, right, our LGBTQIA plus employees. And if it is something that like, you know, is passed, right, if a bad bill is passed, you could say like, due to this, this is how, you know, it will impact employees. If your organization is like, I guess, allowed or able to, maybe there are some advocacy efforts that y'all could like take up, you know, like whatever's feasible or, you know, I guess legal or allowable. If your company or organization can work with other organizations. So organizations that work in the policy space, lobbying space, like that might be helpful. You know, organizing with other human rights or social justice organizations. There's a lot of work, I think, being done out there around like unions and like workers' rights around LGBTQ issues. So that might be a place where you look towards for just more support and information. Yeah, as a place to start.
Yeah, I echo all of that. And vote, vote.
I'm going to wrap it up with this question because I am cognizant of the time that we're at time. Interesting question that I feel is more expansive outside of just the topic that we're talking about. This person states LGBTQIA plus is a significant part of one's identity and self-perception. Self-advocacy is important. What other aspects of one's personal life do you feel should be strongly advocated for and therefore affirmed? This person mentions the ideas like religion, diet, place of origin, etc. Any thoughts on that? I know that was a long-winded question, so I'll repeat it again here.
Mhm.
LGBTQIA plus is a significant part of one's identity and self-perception. Self-advocacy is important. What other aspects of one's personal life do you feel like should be strongly advocated for and therefore affirmed?
Well, I think people, right, I mean, right, in general, like should be respected, affirmed, right? I think acknowledging folks' humanity overall is just important. I know we're not going to get all of that or all that we need from a workplace. I don't expect that. But we spend a significant part of our time there, like working. So I think that's why all of what we're talking about is important. But as far as maybe other aspects of our identity, religion, yeah. I mean, for some people, for a lot of people, I think diet, outlooks around food and diet are really important and meaningful to them. I think, if that is something that a person wants to advocate for or bring awareness to at work, I'm like, yeah, like I don't see anything wrong with like lifting that up. Let's see, I see the hetero in the question. I'm just gonna say, I feel like hetero folks and folks in majority, we kind of already do that. Like, it's just kind of, it's dominant. So I don't know that there's much more, like speaking as a cis person, for example, right? I don't think there's much more that I could do to be seen or affirmed as a cis person, right? Recognizing like that privilege that exists. And then place of origin. Yeah, I think origin, ethnicity, nationality, those are important parts of our identity as well. I think, yeah, those parts of our identity should also be protected, right? So I think what I'm just saying overall is like, everyone's rights should be protected and that nobody should be harmed or harassed, right? Based on any of these markers. That sounds so official, bleh, so to speak. But I think if one feels strongly about it, if one has run into trouble, discrimination, oppression, right, then yeah, let's lift it up and change it. Sure.
Jordan, any concluding thoughts before we say goodbye here today?
In summation, this was really nice and I learned a lot. And like speaking of like how do we make a workplace, this was just a great example of that. A conversation and a reception. And so yeah, this was really, really wonderful.
Well, the feeling is very much mutual. I hopefully speak for all the participating members of the audience. Kia, Jordan, thank you very much for taking the time out of your busy schedules to share your insights, your knowledge, your expertise, your experiences. We appreciate you. We value you as individuals, and especially when talking about this important topic. Thank you for being here today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Absolutely. Thanks everybody for participating. We look forward to seeing you in future webinars and continuing to engage on important topics. Take care, everybody.